Welcome back to Risky Business, a show about making better decisions. I'm Maria Konnikova.
I'm Nate Silver. Do you ever see the 60 Minutes thing where they're like, I'm Marley Saper, I'm Anderson Cooper, and they go for like 15 fucking people? It's like too much.
It is too much. I'm glad there's only two of us.
Yeah.
So Nate, what are we going to talk about today?
Today on the show, we'll check in on Carolyn Ellison, the former CEO of Alameda Research and girlfriend of Sam Bankman-Fried, who was sentenced to 2 years for her role in the FTX fraud.
And after that, we'll have a little politics update where we talk about the latest polling and also what actually makes a difference to the numbers. Is there anything that we can do in the next few weeks to push the polls one way or the other, make our candidate more or less likely to win?
And then we'll say RIP to a couple of legendary degenerate gamblers.
So, Caroline Ellison, romantic partner, former CEO, first co-CEO, right? And then just sole CEO of Alameda, which was the hedge fund that was associated with FTX. We've talked about Sam Bankman-Fried. We've talked about FTX. But this was a big one because Caroline was one of the biggest names to testify against SBF and to kind of bring the whole thing down. And this week she has been sentenced herself to 2 years. Nate, did you get a chance to meet Caroline when you were doing your research?
I didn't. We put in a request, but she smartly ignored it because unlike Sam Bankman-Fried, she wasn't talking to journalists while she was, on trial for various fraud charges. I did obtain transcripts of the 3 days that Carolyn Ellison spent in court testifying about SBF. And this was a very compelling testimony that basically had SBF dead to rights. In fact, the lawyer that I talked to about the case said that he thought Sam, after Carolyn's testimony, was stupid to testify himself, that he was going to come across unsympathetically to a jury, was going to perjure himself and get a larger sentence, which is what happened. The SBF got 20 years. The judge is a no-nonsense judge, Judge Kaplan, presided over many trials and was not impressed by dear old Sam Bankman-Fried. So things that were apparent in her testimony. One was that Sam had a good deal of awareness of what was happening, that he was aware that she was taking on risks that could result in the bankruptcy of the company, that she had presented the spreadsheets to him, say, hey, if we make these loans, if there's even a mild downturn in crypto prices, which there was all the time, then we're fucked. And he said, I don't care. It's positive expected value. Because he thought, so usually when people calculate expected value, poker players and the like, they are assigning some weight to the risk of ruin, right? The Kelly criteria is a gambling formula that says, let's say I want to bet on the Packers Chiefs game this weekend. How much should I bet given my edge as a share of my bankroll? And basically tells you how to maximize your return without having any chance of going truly broke. Now,
and by the way, let's just caveat that a little bit because we know, and you've written about the fact that the Kelly criterion might actually not be the best way to do this if you actually want to avoid.
Yeah, one problem is that it assumes you know your edge, and if you know your edge, then well, that's wonderful, but that's not how real sports betting works most of the time. You're estimating your edge, and most gamblers, even smart gamblers, tend to overestimate.
Overestimate, yes.
So therefore, most gamblers have learned through time that you want to have half Kelly or a quarter Kelly, even. A full Kelly bet intuitively to most gamblers looks very aggressive. You could have yourself betting 15% of your entire bankroll on one game where you have only a small edge, for example.
And to a gambler like SBF, though, the Kelly criterion might look not aggressive enough.
Was for wimps, because what it doesn't do is tell you how to maximize your expected value if you don't care about going broke. In the book, I ran some simulations where you bet 5x Kelly instead of 0.5 Kelly. And what happens is that 99% of the time over the course of simulating an NFL season, you go broke, but 1% of the time you wind up with more money than Elon Musk.
And that's why you have positive expected value.
Right. So having a 1 in 1,000 chance of earning $225 billion from a $10,000 starting bankroll, whatever simulations we made, right? is very plus EV if you don't care about the fact that you are in
Right.
debtor's prison the other 99.9% of the time.
Exactly. So PSA for our listeners, do not try this at home. The one person who did is currently in prison for 20
Um,
years.
so yeah, so SPF was aware of the risks they were taking and kind of like was LLL kind of like shrugging them off, right? Was aware of the mechanism by which these trades are occurring, which is that you open up a flood wall or a floodgate between the customer funds secured as Alameda and money that they were then trading with and making bets on shit coins and other things. This is the part where Sam, when I talked to him, would get more legalistic about saying, well, technically customer funds were wired to X and Y and I anyway, the jury didn't buy his bullshit, and so I don't really either. But they were knowingly taking customer funds and making what Sam knew to be really risky bets, and Ellison was aware of this and trying to present these risks to Sam. Now, we should say she is a government witness. You sign a plea deal, right? And that means that
Mhm.
you're going to be presented in a favorable light. She kind of presents herself as some sheep in the wool. Is that the right metaphor? I don't know.
I think that's not quite the right metaphor, but I think she does present herself as a victim, as someone who, jumped into the abyss. And even the judge actually agreed and referred to the fact that Sam Bankman-Fried was her kryptonite. Right. So in that analogy, she would be Superman if he's kryptonite, right? And he's
Oh
bringing
yeah,
her
people
down.
screw that up a lot.
People
Yeah.
really screw that analogy up. I just want to point that out. But yes, she presented herself as a victim, as someone who knew it was wrong, but did it anyway, and then couldn't see straight because her professional life and her um, private life were too deeply intertwined. She basically was a pawn. So I don't know what the sheep metaphor here would be. It's not a wolf in sheep's clothing. That would be SBF, I think. But yeah, she is someone who was maybe a lamb
Sam's
led to
haircut
the.
was a little sheep-like, I suppose, right?
It was lamb to the
His
slaughter. I don't
hair.
know. I'm trying to take all my metaphors out here.
I mean, look, one other thing
Yeah.
about FTX is that like it's very much a cult like uh company.
Hmm.
Um, when you go there, I went to the Bahamas after everyone except for two FTX employees and Sam's mom and dad, and Sam himself had fled. And it's not the typical, but from the talking to these ex-employees, it's like not the typical crypto bro, finance bro atmosphere. Instead, it's like this touchy-feely, effective altruist. They think they're stealing from the rich to I don't know what to for Sam's charitable endeavors. They're isolated, right? The
Hmm.
Bahamas is not actually, or this part of the Bahamas, right, that they're in, on the southwest corner of New Providence Island, is not party central. You're away from the
Yep.
Bahamar and the Atlantis and Nassau and the cruise ship docks.
I
They're
love your
isolated.
calculus, by the way, that you could probably outrun him if it if it
I think
came
I
to
could.
it.
I think I could outrun Sam Bankman-Fried if I needed to. I don't think it'd be very fast. Uh, but yeah, but so there, it's kind of a cult, and Sam makes this claim that, oh, I'm doing this because I want to eventually, accumulate more money because the marginal utility is very high because I'll donate it to charity. Although actually he might do things like donate to presidential candidates and try to curry influence and favors.
Hmm.
But so you have true believers, and and she is close to this inner circle. One thing clearly, Sam is smart enough to not share his fraudulent intent widely, right?
Right.
It's the inner circle and not much else. Doesn't go much further than that. So I don't know. I mean, so how many years did she accept as part of the plea deal?
2 years. She just got
Okay.
sentenced to 2 years. She had, as part of the plea deal, she didn't accept anything immediately, in the sense that she was still going to await sentencing. And her lawyers and actually the prosecutors also argued for no prison time because of how much she cooperated. But the judge said that, she couldn't get it. I think this was literally the quote, a get out of jail free card. I was like, haha, I cannot believe you just said that. But yes, that is what happened. So she was sentenced to 2 years. But I think talking about kind of this type of environment is actually quite interesting because you use the word true believer, which we've used on the show in the past when we're talking about con artists. And the mark of a true believer is you don't know, right, that you're committing fraud. Like you actually believe in this and you believe it's the right thing to do. And what you were just talking about, Caroline knew what she was doing, right? She knew that it was wrong. She knew what the risk of ruin was. She knew that this was defrauding, but she felt, her loyalty was such that she did it anyway. So I think that we can't call her a true believer, right? We can't call her like a true brainwashed cult victim because she knew this was wrong and she did it anyway. I think we can still give her some sort of, she's one of these people who's kind of in between because I think she has some characteristics of victim, right? And I think that the cult environment is really interesting because it makes dissent much less likely. It means that even if you're not a true believer, but everyone around you kind of is because they don't know the full extent of it, then that kind of influences you as well. And you start thinking, maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe this isn't fraud, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You start trying to convince yourself. But on the other hand, because she knew it, I think she was also a perpetrator. Instead of whistleblowing, instead of leaving, instead of going to the authorities, she did it anyway. And so I think that I'm totally on board with giving her a lighter sentence because given the testimony, like given what she did, I think that that's absolutely correct. And I do see that there are elements of victimhood there. Like I'm not blaming her. I'm not giving her a complete saying, oh shit, no, she's a horrible person. And she does seem very unlike SBF, she seems be to feel really, really bad, or at least she's a very good actor and saying that she feels really, really bad. And that's completely absent in what he's doing. In fact, he's appealing his sentence, right? He said that the judge was biased and that he deserves to not be in jail at all. And she seems to be kind of, I don't know if at peace is the right word, but she seems to have accepted that like she did bad and she deserves to be punished.
I'm trying to remember the reporting. I think it was from the Michael Lewis book, but she
Mhm.
apparently felt like a great sense of relief when she realized that they were fucked. Um, because they were fucked sooner or later. I mean, even when it talked to
Right.
me, Sam was kind of like, well, we could have played out the string for a few more months, and then you never know what happens, right? But she knew when she realized they were fucked, she's like, okay, finally, this has an ending. I
Hmm.
mean, I don't know about by the way, just to remind you, if you just, I mean, she was sleeping with her boss too, where he was
Yes,
sleeping
she
with
was.
her.
Yes, yes, yes. They were part of a relationship. I think it was even like a polycule, right? It wasn't just if I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
that part of the story, I didn't care to investigate
Yeah.
that much. I don't really want to picture certain things. But
I
yeah,
don't blame you, Nate. I don't blame you.
I mean, isn't the game theory such that like, isn't it? Aren't we giving people too many incentives to be cooperating witnesses or not? What's the expected value? You know what I mean of committing fraud? If you're
Right.
not the principal, oh, now 2 years, hey, not so bad, not so bad. 2 years.
Well, it's so funny that you say that because I actually read an analysis and I thought I was like, no, this analysis is fucked. This isn't true at all. They're like, she got 2 years. This is going to mean that no one's ever going to cooperate because like she should have just gotten off free. Like if you cooperate, you shouldn't get any jail time. And I was like, no, I don't think that's right. Like if you are conspiring to defraud people out of $8 billion, like that's, with a B, that's a lot of money. Unless you end up in the 1% of the simulation where you have more money than Elon Musk. But in the other 99.9%, the 8 billion is a lot of money. And
How about
so
just 1 second of prison time for every dollar you steal? That's not too bad.
one
Um,
second, I can't do that math. How long is that going to be?
long look. I don't know. I'm not good at math. And people think I'm good at math. I have to like pull up
Yeah,
my
I have to.
calculator half the
Same with
time.
me. Same with me.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I think she's getting off a little bit light. Other people think that she's not getting off light enough. And I do think that it's a really interesting, I think your question is a really, really interesting one. What's the game theory here, right? What's the game theory on fraud, on trying to do these sorts of things? If you look at SBF and you're like, okay, you're going to jail for at least 20 years, like that doesn't seem very good.
I
But
mean,
like,
this is literally the prisoner's dilemma,
yeah,
right?
it
Where
is.
you
It
have,
actually literally is the prisoner's dilemma. Yes.
yeah,
Are we going to, except they were allowed to communicate because they weren't isolated from each other right away,
okay,
right? Yeah. But otherwise it was the literal.
253 years for that's a lot of seconds. We get to live a lot of seconds. Gee, that means we get to live like
Holy
3
shit.
billion seconds. That's a fucking lot. I'm wasting more seconds from now on. I know that made it burn. Um, yeah, no, and the game theory of the prisoner's dilemma says that you ultimately do snitch on your
Mhm.
partner.
Yeah.
It's too hard to maintain
And she did.
confidence. Yeah, and she did.
And she did. Um, and that's, but this was one of those cases. It's actually really interesting. The game theory changes depending on how much evidence there is, right? Like it's one of these, if you have two prisoners and they don't actually have anything on on you, and they need the confession, then it's very different from we have reams of data and we actually know, we'll be able to trace the finances and we'll be able to catch you anyway. And if you cooperate, maybe it'll be less time. And I believe, and Nate, correct me if I'm wrong, because you know a lot more about this case than I do. I believe that they did have enough evidence where even without Caroline, they would have been able to have a pretty strong case.
Yeah, I mean, I think she was the key witness, but like they had more evidence than they really needed, frankly.
Yeah. And they had two other witnesses, by the way. There were three top executives who ended up turning and testifying against SBF.
By the way, the story does have a happy ending. It looks as though most of the defrauded people will get their money back with interest, in part because some things that FTX did have gone well. So they invested in Anthropic, the AI company, and also you've seen a big rise in crypto prices since the bankruptcy.
Oh, that's good. I didn't
Good
realize
for
that.
yeah,
Good for
good
good
for
for
the
them.
poker. Good for the poker economy. Let's pump that crypto back into some high rollers, okay, guys?
Absolutely. Let's do it. But yeah, I think the bottom line here is that like Caroline is, SBF is to me like not particularly complex to kind of talk about, in the sense of like, was he a con artist? We have talked about that. I think he was, and like, he clearly knew exactly what he was doing. Caroline knew what she was doing, but I do think that she's a more complex character here because you do also have the power dynamic, you have the sexual dynamic, you have all sorts of things going on. Oh, by the way, can we also note that she became CEO? She had 1.5 years of trading experience prior to joining Alameda, at Jane Street Capital. 1.5 years. And talk about overconfidence. And she even talks about this. She's like, well, like I kind of knew about trading. I had more experience than everyone else there. And
Yeah.
then that's like this light bulb moment. You're like, wait, what? You're the CEO because with a year and a half, you have the most experience out of anyone at this fund that's getting billions of dollars. Something ain't right. But it happened. I just thought that that was a very interesting side note.
You want to talk some politics, Maria?
I do want to talk some politics, Nate. Hey, we are now 1 week closer to the election. And I know that sounds dramatic, but I mean it's getting, it's getting close, right? We're almost, are we in October yet? What day is it? Is it October 1st today? It's Tuesday, right?
It's October,
Oh,
which means that I'm late on the monthly paid subscriber newsletter post that I'm
oh no.
supposed
Nate,
to post in the.
as a paid subscriber, I'm livid. I'm so mad that you're late on this post.
They took away the 31st.
Oh no.
September doesn't September seem like it should be 31, right?
It actually does seem that way, but and you know what? I never remember. I actually have to do the little rhyme. Did you ever learn that little rhyme in
You can
school?
do the
30.
finger thing,
I do
January,
that.
February.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do the finger thing, but I also have my little rhyme. 30 days has September, April, June, and November. All
Okay,
the
so
rest have 31.
what month shouldn't have a 31st day? Should we give to September?
Um, I say I would say either say November,
Yeah,
or
yeah. Let's get rid of that
November.
November.
November's a pretty shitty
God,
month. Yeah.
November is 31.
Yeah.
November should be 30.
Wait, no, does November have 30? November has 30. I just gave my rhyme. 30 days has September, April, June, and November. November already has 30. I hate November so much that I wanted to subtract yet another one.
Let's
All
do
right,
that. Okay,
let's
November
okay,
has 29
29.
days now.
Let's do it. All right, November has 29 days, September has 31. Done. Guys, we've made your life so much better. This is what you come to us for. This is the
This is the
hard-hitting news stuff
Tuesday, September 31st edition of Risky
of risky
Business.
business. But okay. Let's get to it. We're in October. We're getting close. What's going on? Has anything changed? And then let's talk about, what people can be doing in this lead up where we're now like weeks away from the actual election.
So not very much has changed. Kamala Harris has a 3-point lead roughly in national polls. She is ahead by about a point in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. She's behind by about a point in Georgia, Arizona. She's tied, actually she's ahead by a point or so in Nevada, North Carolina. About a tie, big hurricane there. More important
Nevada?
things. Nevada. Uh, is there like the Silver State? I can just say the Silver State.
The Silver State. There you go.
Yeah.
So please continue.
All that works out to basically a toss up. If you want to play the percentages, we have Harris at a 55.1% chance of winning the Electoral College as of this morning. Trump 44.7, dead heat, a tie, 0.3%. Like hitting, I don't know what bet is 300 to 1. I was going to say like hitting the double zero space in roulette, but that's much more likely than 0.3%.
Yeah.
So, look, I think if the election were held today, then you'd slightly rather be Harris. She is ahead in nominally enough states to win 276 electoral votes, including Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and the Silver State, Nevada. Wait, is it Nevada or Nevada? Nevada.
Nevada.
Okay, so it's not Sierra Nevada. It's not the fancy Nevada. Nevada is a pretty word.
It is. I actually prefer Nevada, but
there's this really good Substack post where they rate the state names, and like most state names are pretty fucking good. You know, a great name is California. What a great fucking name!
It is. It is. It really does give you promises of beauty and sunshine. California rolls off.
What's the worst state? What's the worst state name according to Substack posts?
I don't know.
Iowa.
Okay.
Think about it. There aren't that many bad state names.
Yeah.
A low-key bad state name is Washington. Like, name it. I mean, come on. You're beautiful
Washington.
State.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're way far up. You create confusion with Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
You weren't even part of the Republic when Washington was president. I mean, come on, right? Like, let's pick something.
It's also, you're right. And the level of creativity there has really just like gone down. Why did we have to go for Washington? I'd like to know the history of this because I love Washington. I think it's such a gorgeous state. So other than state names, I do think something that you said kind of gets into one of the topics that we wanted to cover today, which is what actually matters. So we've had some pretty severe storms, right, over the last week with a lot of destruction. The death toll keeps rising. I mean, it's really horrific. Do things like that in the lead up? I'm not talking like a year ago, right? Does the fact that this is happening right now, do events like that actually matter when it comes to the election outcomes? Does the response matter? Like what's actually important or not?
Well, clearly the candidates think it matters because there's a lot of posturing over, Trump, as he is inclined to do, is saying some things that seem exaggerated according to the fact checkers. No, but like he's saying that why isn't Biden going there and why is he holding up relief? But the Biden-Harris administration has approved relief funds and they're trying to get there and the roads are out and I don't know, right?
Yeah.
So it becomes this kind of like another cable news cycle where you just want to tune out. But clearly, there are precedents. After Hurricane Sandy hit New Jersey and the East Coast in late 2012,
and
Obama and New York, I remember. I mean, power, it was fucking crazy.
I
Like
didn't have I
power
didn't
was
have
out.
heat, I didn't have power, and I didn't have cell
I had to go
service.
like back and forth to the New York Times building in like this darkened tax. Anyway,
Yeah.
but like Obama did better in some of these areas where the storms had
Yeah.
hit. So there's like a bipartisan praise for a leader that can be good if it's Hurricane Katrina, and there's bipartisan disputes for how it was handled, right? Then that could be bad. I mean, I researched some papers for this. Some findings say it tends to help incumbents, which would be good for Biden. Some just say it gives more polarization, that
Hmm.
it just increases, Team Red thinks that Republicans did this well and Team Blue thinks Democrats did well, et cetera.
So then it's a
Look,
wash kind of in
I,
the end.
I would say, look, in general, uh, this is a moment, natural disasters are a moment when you appreciate having the government in your life, right? Or at
Yeah.
least they don't totally fuck up the recovery. So if you're like a little bit of a closet libertarian like me, then like when there's a fucking hurricane or a snowstorm, you're like, I'm really fucking glad that there are trucks plowing the roads and we're not
Hmm.
in some libertarian utopia where we have to pay for private tow trucks or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So uh, that might be good for Democrats. It also raises the salience of climate change. I don't want to get into a discussion over which hurricanes are caused by climate change or the
Sure.
different effects of hurricanes. But you have had more storms with this very bad inland flooding, and again, I'll leave it to the experts to determine how much that is because of building patterns versus climate change versus luck, basically.
Yeah, but maybe worth noting that in this particular case, also North Carolina is a swing state, right? So,
And
um,
Georgia was
and
affected as
Georgia was
well.
affected
Yeah.
as well. And Georgia is, sorry, I forgot your latest update. Georgia's still leaning red, right?
By a point. Trump's ahead
Hmm.
by a point ish there, point and a half, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this will be interesting. I hope people are gathering data on this, and I hope that there are some polling going on right now because I'd be very curious because I do think that these sorts of events do happen and will continue happening and will increase in in severity. So it is interesting for me to see whether they will matter. But now there's obviously nothing that we as individuals can do about that, right? Like that's, the environment, it happens. And here, the politician's response may or may not matter. But what about people on either side of the divide, Trump supporters, Harris supporters, who want to make sure that they're doing everything they can in the run up to try to get kind of the voters that may be on the fence or undecided or don't know if they're going to vote or whatnot to actually vote? What matters? Donations matter? Going door to door, does that matter? Do any of these things actually make a meaningful difference, or do they just make us feel a little bit better, like recycling, which doesn't actually matter?
What helps is being a dick on social media really helps your candidate win. So do more of that. By the way, if you want to donate to charity to help the people in the Carolinas,
Yeah,
etc., then I would recommend charitynavigator.org gives you a whole list of local charities, which are usually more effective than that's a little
that's great.
effective
That's a great.
altruism plug for the
Yeah,
day.
that's a great recommendation.
Um, so look, I think that the presidential campaigns have more money than they need. And this is
Mhm.
not me in a crotchety way. It's saying like, they are running all the ads they want to the point where the ads have diminishing returns. They have all the field staff they want. Maybe if you started out with all the money 4 years ahead of time, you could do more ambitious things and so forth. But like, don't donate to a presidential campaign. Donate to a down ballot campaign, maybe a Senate campaign. Senate
Hmm.
campaigns have a lot of money too. But U.S. House races, state Supreme Court races,
Hmm.
state legislature races, right? These are cases where a little bit of money can make more difference. By the way, I think in general, I don't think that political donations count particularly. I don't mean in like a moral way. I think they're probably, donate to charity instead of a
Hmm.
campaign is also a valid strategy. Um,
Makes
Look,
sense to me.
um, most campaigns believe that door to door canvassing can help a bit. One thing that happened in 2020 is that Democrats were COVID shy
Hmm.
and did not do traditional canvassing. And lo and behold, Biden underperforms his polls by a few points on election day. And I'm not saying it's a major cause, but like that may have been a mistake in retrospect. Um,
So that seems to suggest, because I was about to say, are there data that suggest that poll to poll, that door to door polling and canvassing and all of that actually is effective, or is it just that politicians believe this and it's never been challenged? Do we actually have
I think
data?
that's more studyable because you can kind of
No, it's
do
clearly studyable. I'm
randomized
I'm just
trial. I think the academic consensus that it does help a little bit.
okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
on the margin, it helps, which is important, right? Because right now we're looking for on the margin. So for either candidate on the margin, it should help. Um, what about endorsements? So, we talked a few weeks ago. Taylor Swift obviously was a major endorsement. Do those things matter? Does it matter? Obviously, like there are levels of endorsement, right? Like at some point, I saw the Kamala Harris campaign retweeting that like Meryl Streep has endorsed her and this is huge. I'm like, I don't think Meryl Streep's endorsement matters. I'm sorry. I love you, Meryl Streep, but like, I don't think that's going to move the needle.
Yeah, it's
But
like when
someone
they
like,
it's like when they say somebody that dies and you're like, I thought they already dead,
right?
right? It's like I thought Meryl Streep already endorsed, and that's part of the issue
That's exactly right.
for Tay Tay too. Is I think people assume that she was on the Harris bandwagon already. I mean, look, she apparently drove some voter registration efforts and things like that, and so yeah, look, you definitely take that if you're
Yeah,
Harris, right? But if like, but it's not like you see like a big. I mean, it's complicated because it happened about the same time as a
right.
debate. Um, but it's she, the biggest pop star in the world endorses you, and you can barely see any difference, if any, in the polls. So that puts kind of a cap on, you know,
Sure. What I was actually wondering if maybe the endorsement, you said something which I think is really important, which is that most people kind of already assumed, right, that she was going to be Team Harris because she had endorsed Biden. She had already kind of broken her silence. But what about things like, and here I think there's some really interesting psych research. What about things like Willie Nelson endorsing the Democrats, right? Like you have a white country singer. Like when you have people who look and sound and kind of have the background of someone who would more traditionally be a Trump supporter. Do we think that that actually might matter a little bit more than a Taylor Swift in these particular circumstances?
maybe. I mean, look, people know that the Hollywood types. I guess he's a singer, not a Hollywood type. I take that. Maybe.
He's
I
a
don't know.
singer.
I mean,
Well,
what probably did matter was by the way, Willie Nelson has quite a beautiful catalog of music going back a long way. Anyway, part of what
love it. I
the
love the
the,
editorializing
the
on the side.
most
Here
important
for it.
endorsement in the race so far has probably been RFK Jr. endorsing
Hmm.
Trump. That
Endorsing Trump.
coincided
Yeah.
with a rough period for Harris in the polls,
Hmm.
and like, and those voters are lost, and I think so that might have mattered a fair bit. By
Yeah.
a fair bit, I
So
mean by like half a point or something, but like half a point
which is
is
important,
yeah.
which is really important as we keep talking about. And there's also some psych research that's really interesting into kind of the psychology of social influence and having an effect on social norms and behavior. And a lot of this research comes from Princeton University. Betsy Pollock, she won the MacArthur Genius Grant a number of years ago for this work. And some of the stuff that she shows is that you need to have the correct person say things, and they have to actually be kind of from the background and kind of the from a place that people who you're trying to influence actually respect, right? So if you're trying to influence potential Trump voters to vote for Kamala Harris, then you want to be probably a white male from certain states with a certain background. If you want to try to get Trump voters, if you want to get Kamala Harris voters to vote for Trump, you probably want someone who, is a minority or, female, someone who has kind of a more of a Kamala Harris vibe, and then have them endorse Trump. That would matter more. There was a really cool study that was done on social media to see like basically what can you do to mitigate trolls, right? Like how can you get people to change behavior? And the one thing that actually worked the best was if you create an account that's like a generic white man and he says, hey, like, this is a real person, like just you might want to tone it down a little bit. That actually worked as opposed to anything else. So it's I think that when we talk about endorsements, they're not all created equal, not just because of the reach, like, oh, you're a superstar, you're a pop star, but also like, who is your demographic? Who do you represent? What is your specific, voter appeal? And will you be able to look like a person of authority to the voters that you're trying to reach?
Two other important stories that I think we can't not mention. Let me start with one that's like a bit less obvious. Port workers have gone on strike in both the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. Some enormous amount of commerce passes through one of these ports, and this could potentially have a devastating effect on the economy and shipping, which is
Mm-hmm.
already a little bit constrained because you have problems with the Houthis in the Red Sea. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So you already have like some shipping channels that are operating at less than full capacity. That more kind of affects Europe than the US. But supply chains have struggled to get back to normal, and this could cause big problems. You also have a hurricane and things like that that's affected. So this is a real dilemma for a Democratic White House. Biden has said he does not want to invoke the Taft-Hartley Act that could require these striking workers to go back to work. But they have a lot of leverage, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're like, well, fuck your election up unless you give us a nice new contract. And I mean, that's we understand leverage, right? And they have a lot
Yeah,
of leverage.
absolutely.
So far, the Biden White House has been able to placate problems like this in the past. But like that to me is like a potential
Mm-hmm.
October surprise that has to play negatively for Harris and Biden.
Absolutely. And if we just like a little caveat, I think a tie-in to endorsements, given that this is kind of a workers' strike, is that the Teamsters Union did not endorse either candidate for the first time in a long time. So just something to keep in mind as we think about this October surprise potentially.
Yeah, probably most Teamster members are Trumpian, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah, it was actually Teamsters are leaning more Trump, even though the Teamsters have endorsed the Democrats in the past. In the latest survey data that I've seen, the Teamsters are heavily leaning Trump.
um the other, of course, is the re-escalating conflict in the Middle East. We kind of have a policy on this show
Yep.
of like not
No Middle
leaning
East.
out from Middle East discussion, except to the extent that affects, but like
Yep.
that's a little harder to
Yep.
predict, right? It's opportunities to show leadership potentially, but look, I mean, you can make an argument that like foreign policy has not gone that well under Biden. The Middle East is kind of blowing up, and Ukraine was invaded. American relations with China are probably worse now than they were. If Trump were more coherent and normal, then he could form a pretty good critique of Biden's foreign policy, I think. Um, and this is a reminder of that. Now, voters usually don't care about foreign policy that much. To the extent they do, it's kind of about, I was going to say that, that it's the politics of, it's not the foreign policy, right? It's the politics of the state of Israel and how they exist or failed to coexist with Palestinians, and that's territory where I have written about that some just because it like affects American politics so much. That seemed to have died down to some degree, although 2% of the population is Arab American in Michigan, around the Dearborn area. There clearly have been signs and polls that shifted from being a Democratic vote to people who are throwing their hands up and saying, I don't know what I'm going to do. So that has an effect on the margin, but anyway, I just want to mention those two
Yeah.
important stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it is interesting to see how much any one thing will end up affecting any person's decision to vote, just because we are in such a close race, right? So much closer than than we have been in the past. And so I think that those things on the margin may matter, especially when we're talking like back to the ports. I think that oftentimes voters are not thinking that long term. So that's why foreign policy often doesn't end up making that big of a difference. But if we see And I don't know if there's enough time to actually see any change in prices, availability, et cetera, in the next few weeks. But if we do see that, then I think that that will become a much bigger issue.
This is also a test of Biden and his capabilities. If you have multiple
Yeah.
crises happening at once, I mean, the media seems reluctant. I mean, once Dryden dropped out, it was forced out. Um, by the way, the Dana Carvey impression of Biden was pretty fucking good
It
on
was very
SNL.
good. Yes, if you have not seen it, I highly endorse that.
But like since then, the media has not been very interested in covering his um, performance issues, and this will be a test, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's see. I mean, I think that we will have some potentially testable hypotheses next week when we revisit polling data and see what has changed to see if any of this actually makes a difference. Let's talk about something. Well, I was going to say lighter, but it involves death, but not politics related. Lighter, but it involves death because we had two people who are quite important in the gambling world die since, in the last few days. One of those died. Today is what, Tuesday? So yesterday, Pete Rose, and he was one of the first people we talked about on this podcast. And the other, less well known to the mainstream public, Archie Callis. Nate, do you have any thoughts on the death of Pete Rose and his legacy for the world of baseball and the world of gambling?
Yeah, I mean, Pete was I never met him. I think he was kind of the classic degen, right?
You
And
can
he
say
lived
that
in Las
again.
Vegas till late in his life, right?
He did, yeah, yeah. After he was no longer allowed to be associated with baseball, he made the move to Las Vegas.
Yeah, look, this was kind of I don't know, the end of a certain era of innocence for
Yeah.
baseball, I suppose. I mean, Pete Rose, if you're not a baseball fan, right, he played the game differently than anyone else, right? Lots of base hits, lots of his nickname was Charlie Hustle, right? Would barrel into catchers and second basemen. I mean, he played baseball like it was football, basically. Now, people like me, before Pete Rose was known for gambling, people like me would have said, "Oh, Pete Rose, he's a little bit overrated, right?" It was the only subject of, he does have the most hits in Major League Baseball history. He doesn't get on base that much and doesn't have that much power. A very, very good player, but we'd say, yeah, he's one of the 20 best of all time, but not, you know, having the hits record doesn't necessarily. He also played forever, right? He played Cincinnati, Philadelphia, Montreal, briefly Cincinnati again, played till he was like 40 some years old. So beloved, right? But he clearly, I think, bet on baseball. There's not much ambiguity about that. And baseball kind of always was very unforgiving about ever commuting his sentence or really letting Pete Rose participate in any ways. And I kind of understand that, but like I'm trying to remember some of the history. I mean, I think partly
Originally, he said that he bet on other sports, but never bet on baseball. He was still found to be guilty of betting on baseball. And he, in his memoir, admitted that, yeah, he did bet on baseball, but never for his team to lose because he only wanted his team to win, as,
I think
as if that made it any better. But
part of it is, so you had this commissioner of baseball named Bart Giamatti, who was
mhm.
a president of Yale University and like this English literature professor who was kind of this intellectual who was going to take baseball to some new cultural significance. And he got tied up with Pete Rose and then died of a heart attack after only like
I think
four or five months.
no, I think it was closer. I think it was like weeks after he passed down the verdict.
As we served for commissioner April through September, and then
Okay.
but yeah, the verdict, it
Oh,
was just
yeah, it was
yeah.
right after he said that Pete Rose was not allowed to play. I think that he died like a week after that
Um,
of a broken
my
heart.
my theory is that this is part of why baseball was kind of so unforgiving to Pete, and the fact that Pete Rose, I'm sure, was an asshole, right? But the fact that I think people, I don't. I don't know this I'm just going by the psychology. I think they think, Pete Rose somehow killed Bart Giamatti through grief, died of a broken heart kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's end that with one question for you, Nate. I just want a yes or no. Does Pete Rose deserve to be in the Hall of Fame?
No.
Okay. All right.
Ben on baseball. Yeah.
There you got it.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah.
All right. And another legendary gambler died who did not play baseball. Died this week, Archie Karras. And do you know his story, Nate?
No.
So he is someone who um, had the nickname the Greek, just like another famous gambler in gambling history. And he went on one of the most legendary runs in gambling history. And it's so legendary that it's just known as the Run with a capital R. So he was just a total degen, but in this particular case, he went from $50 to over 40 million as he went on this insane gambling run, and then he lost it all back. And he did this through a combination of just going on an insane run in craps, which happens, right? Like he was in that percent of the distribution. Then he actually played some poker, and people used to love playing poker against him because he wasn't very good, but he thought he was very good. But then he went on quite the run where he ended up beating some of the top players in the game, including Chip Reese, for millions of dollars. And yeah, and then he did some sports betting, and he just did incredibly well. 40 million. I think this was 1992 to 1994. And then he went broke. Um, and eventually, he was accused of cheating multiple times, cheating in blackjack. And then he became, I believe, the 33rd person, but I might be wrong, 32nd, 34th, something along those lines, to enter the infamous Black Book of Las Vegas casinos. Yeah. So became banned for life from every single casino property in the state of Nevada. And if he were to enter one, he would be immediately arrested. So that is how he ended his days. But how crazy is that? I just want to say this is next level degen. $50, 40 million, broke.
Could be you, audience member. No, don't.
No, he was clearly a sick individual.
You get 40 million playing craps. Stop.
Walk away. Walk away. Invest some of it. If you want to keep playing craps, fine. Like put 100,000. That's even too much of it back into craps, and the rest just walk away, please. But no one ever does. And I think that there's also the hubris there, right? To think that I must be so good. And that happened with his poker playing as well. People knew he wasn't good. That's why they were playing against him. And then he just beat all of these players. And that can happen when you're playing heads up, right? In any one scenario, in any one iteration, the worst player in the world can beat the best player in the world if you just run it once. Because that's, poker is a game of skill. But in the immediate term, in one specific hand, in one game, there's a huge element of chance. So do not let that chance get to you. And do not forget that sometimes you just run ridiculously lucky. Do not be Archie and then take that 40 million and go broke. Rest in peace, Archie. Rest in peace, Pete. The world has lost two gamblers of very different stripes today.
Think about the poker games we'll have in hell. I don't know what that was.
That's a good. Anyway, I like your hell voice.
I've been in the 2-5 game at the Commerce, and so I know what poker in hell feels like. On that note, we'll see you all next week.
All right.
Thanks for joining us, and tune in again every time we have a show.
Oh, and one more thing, listeners, we would love to leave you with an email address for the show. If there's ever anything you really want us to talk about, if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Super easy. Risky business, all one word, lowercase, at pushkin.fm.